climbs off all by itself. It does it itself. Okay?
Yeah, you're right there with me though.
Every time I open the hangar door to go flying, I realize that I'm one of the lucky guys doing something that I dreamt of as a kid.
They tied me up on a big column in the lobby with my hands behind me like this, and the wives would come by and spit on me.
Mr. President, I've been home since Friday, been to 2 dinner parties. No one asked me where I've been for the past year or what I've been doing. In case someone does, what would you like me to say? And he said, well, Colonel, you tell them that we are preventing the North Vietnamese from interfering in the democratic process in South Vietnam. I said, sir, I can't say that.
And then when Hitler very eloquently discussed his plans factually, I interrupted him. I said, mein Führer, you have to address him with this, mein Führer, how long does the war in Russia last? Or when is the war finished? My camera shocked, interrupting Hitler. Rall, this I don't know. The great leader doesn't know about his plans when he's finishing the war against Russia.
But in retrospect, I wish I had talked more about my military record. I think that it would have strengthened my criticism of the Vietnam War if I could say, you know, in World War II we didn't have this, we didn't do this. We had a clear objective.
They are all stories that began in a simpler time, and in the very different place that was the world of the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. In the wonder, innocence, and anticipation of their youth, they could scarcely know that one fateful day they would be called to defend with their lives, their families, and their homes. Called from the hills of Tennessee and the Dakota Prairie, from the rivers of Ohio and the orchards of California, from New York City and the Bavarian Alps, called to defend the very lands of their birth in the most cataclysmic conflict in the history of the world. Then, after literally saving the world that shaped them, they quietly went home to shape a new world, of cars and interstate highways and television, of atomic energy and computers, of space travel and the internet, of wonders so mind-boggling and life-changing they threatened to overwhelm that defining adventure of their youth. But if you have been to war, you never forget it. No matter how much the world has changed, you do not forget what you experienced and what you learned when your life was in peril. And now they are leaving. More than 1,000 of them a day are dying, and all that they saw and felt and learned and did is leaving with them. Realizing that, we have a new national interest in the greatest generation. In many ways, this is a story of passage, and it is the story of a place like other places where a departing generation entrusts its cultural legacy to those who will carry on, where they will tell, in some cases for the last time, those who have ears to hear what it was really like and what they learned from it. The stories are countless in number and as different as snowflakes. For a little while longer, You can hear them from the mouths of those who wrote them. You can hear many of them here on an airfield in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, in a forum called Warbirds in Review. In an airplane, the guy was a mongoose. It's hard to believe if the only Bud Anderson you knew was the one on the ground. Calm, gentlemanly, a grandfather, funny, an all-round nice guy. But once you got him in an airplane, he's vicious. Shot down 17 airplanes. Best fighter pilot I've ever seen. The man who spoke those words would certainly be in a position to know. He flew with Bud Anderson in England as part of the celebrated 357th Fighter Group. Bud became a triple ace in the P-51 Mustang, racking up 16 1/4 kills over 2 tours of duty. Flying 116 missions in his venerable Old Crow, Anderson was so skilled that he was never hit by an enemy aircraft and never turned back for any reason. In fact, he can only recall one occasion when an enemy pilot was able to get behind him. Little wonder that General Chuck Yeager called him the best he's ever seen. There were 30 years of continuous service for this soft-spoken farm kid from Central California, including some of the most dangerous post-war flight testing done by the Air Force. Commanding a squadron of F-86 jets in Korea, and 25 combat missions in F-105s during the Vietnam War. To understand Bud Anderson, you have to understand just how much flying means to him. And he won't try to tell you that. He once wrote, "How do you explain this sort of feeling to those who don't fly? How do you explain color to somebody blind from birth?" Not only does Bud continue to fly well into his 80s, thanks in large part to his friendship with NASCAR legend Jack Roush, he continues to fly Mustangs. Roush, of course, has a fascination for machines that go fast. But in addition to that, he has a deep interest in and respect for the men and airplanes who have flown in harm's way to defend this country.
I think that period of time, World War II and all the mobilization of the economy and the industry and all, was one of America's proudest periods when we're able to pull together as a country and go take care of our interests and go defend ourselves for what our beliefs were. And so that's a proud part of American history that I share with today with Bud and with the other fellows that survived. My father was in the war, and I certainly lost him in the meantime, but I certainly remember his sacrifice as well as the sacrifice of all Americans who participate in any way. The idea of being able to preserve the hardware creates the forum to have the discussions and to remember, where we came from and what our roots are. It's really important.
And how did Jack and Bud become such fast friends?
I was always a race fan, but I didn't follow it avidly. And Can't remember when I really first heard of him, but it was like I knew him, you know, because of the race things. I can't pick a date, but
I can help you with that. I called you up. I called you up in probably November of 1992, and I said, I bought this airplane. I want to give it a historically significant motif. Do you have something you can send me that would give me something to think about? And you dug into your archives and got out a bunch of pictures, made me photocopies. But from my initial inquiry about who we could honor with recreating an airplane that would celebrate their military career, Colonel Anderson never offered the Old Crow as a possibility, and his being the recipient of that exposure, he never offered that. Other people around him made that suggestion.
But the fact that Bud Anderson was too modest to suggest Roush paint the Mustang in the Old Crow scheme doesn't mean that it wasn't important to him.
for me, at my age, to be able to fly is pretty special. But then to be able to fly a Mustang is even more special. But then to fly a Mustang that's painted just like the one I flew in World War II is pretty special. I mean, it gets me right here. I can't say enough about Jack Roush for doing what he's done for me.
And so it goes with this modest American hero. Ask him about his exploits, he'll tell you about his crew.
You know, the fighter pilots get all the press and all the whatever, you know. You never hear about the crew chiefs and the kind of support that we had. But think about it a little bit. If you're the crew chief of this airplane or any airplane, it's your airplane and you got your pilot and you know he gets a kill and you paint that thing on there. It's your kill too. I had a crew chief from the time I was in Otto-Hino, time I was in training, and my first tour. Then he got promoted to tech sergeant and was a line chief, and he was responsible for six or eight airplanes. And the winter of 1944, 1945 was considered one of the 100-year winters that they had in Europe. I got a brand new D, this tail number, just like this, but it was solid olive drab when I first got it. And I remember I was the operations officer then, so we were flying mixed airplanes. You've seen these things. Some of them are silver, some are OD, some are half and half. You've seen the pictures of them. That's just one piece in time, the way the airplane looked. They went through tremendous different paint configurations. So this day, I'm looking down, and in the snow background, it was white. 2 dark airplanes and 2 silver airplanes. Well, which one was hiding? It wasn't the camouflaged airplane. And I thought, you know, I know I'm going to finish in the winter. I said, when I landed, there's my 2 crew members in Otto-Hino are standing there, and I said, why don't you paint this, de-paint it and put it in a silver paint scheme like this right here, just exactly like this. And I figured that would take, gosh, you know, what, a couple of days at least? That seemed like a lot of work to me. And I said, whenever it's laid up for heavy maintenance, let's do that. Now, I did put it on the basis of it might save my butt, you know, it might give me a tactical advantage, although honestly I thought this paint scheme was a little cooler than the dark one, but I did have some basis there. And I talked to them, and they all kind of nodded their head, and I went in there, and I was the operations officer, decided to fly the next day. Went home next morning, had our briefing and breakfast, and come out, and I got my parachute, and I walked out over my revetment was right close to the where the airplane was parked. Walked up over it, and I looked down, and there's that Mustang sitting there looking just like this. And these three guys were kind of standing there at attention, and I looked at them, and I looked at their hands, and their hands were raw, and there was blood showing on them, and I felt like a jerk. And I thought, God, did they think I gave them a direct order for that? And then I thought about it a little bit, and I said, you know, those guys, they did it because they wanted to, and they'd worked on that airplane from the instant I'd left and had it ready to go. It's just kind of incredible. But that's just an example. I can't remember when we being short anything over there, and I take my hat off to all the crew chiefs of the world.
I've had the honor to help MC a number of presentations that Colonel Anderson has made to the public, both at Oshkosh and some other places around the country. And what always comes to mind to me as I get ready to go in front of the public with Bud is to remember, take note of the fact that he's one of America's greatest heroes. The kind of person, as a man and as a young man, as an adult, that we'd all like to have been ourselves, or we'd certainly like for our children to be. And so he's a great patriot and a great brave defender of our country and our freedoms. He's one of the world's greatest aviators. You know, he's an inspiration to me in every way that I could tell you as it relates to being a father and a warrior and a man.
If you could take the genes from the consummate military leader and combine them with the genes of the consummate fighter pilot, the result might look just like this. However, if you created a fictional military hero with Brigadier General Robin Olds' resume, an editor would likely reject it for being beyond believable. In 1942, Olds was an All-American tackle for West Point. In 1943, he was commissioned a second lieutenant and completed pilot training. He entered World War II flying a P-38 he named Scat I. As he progressed through different iterations of fighter planes, he simply kept adding Roman numerals to the Scat name. He finished the war in a P-51 named Scat VII. In addition to becoming a double Ace Plus with 12 aerial victories, he destroyed another 11 1/2 aircraft on the ground. He later became the wingman on the Air Force's first aerobatic jet team. In 1966, he became commander of the 8th Tactical Fighter Wing at Ubon Royal Thai Air Force Base, Thailand. Robin Olds flew 152 combat missions in Southeast Asia in F-4 Phantoms, 105 of them over North Vietnam. He shot down 2 North Vietnamese MiG-17s and 2 MiG-21s. Robin Olds was famous for something else. He never learned to mince words or play politics with the mission of the military, as those in the Warbirds in Review audience learned when Olds described his return from Vietnam.
I got home about the last day of September, 1st of October, on a Friday. My family in Washington, and I'm on leave. Phone rang Saturday. Said, get over here to the Pentagon. Chief of Staff wants to see you Monday morning. I said, I'm on leave. He said, doesn't matter, the chief wants to see you. I said, yes, sir, okay. I reported into his office. He's the one that walked up to me and said, take off that mustache. Yes, sir. The next thing I knew, he briefed me, and I'm in the Oval Office of the White House. You know, God, me? LBJ was the president. So I'm sitting on the end of a couch, he's on an easy chair, and his aide, a colonel, Air Force colonel, was sitting on my right. And Mr. President said, welcome home, Colonel. You did well. Thank you very much, sir. Yeah, well, what's it like to be home? That was the weekend that thousands and thousands of hippies marched on the Pentagon. I said, sir, who are all those funny-looking people that marched on the Pentagon yesterday? And I'm going to quote for you folks. He said, I got 240,000 boys over there in Vietnam. When those boys come home, they'll tell the American public what's happening. And I thought, wait a minute. That's your job, not mine. Well, of course, you don't say that. So the best thing I could think of to come up with, sir, I've been home since Friday. Been to a couple of dinner parties. No one asked me where I've been or what I've been doing for the past year. In case somebody does ask, what would you like me to tell them? I'm thinking, you know, end of career. He glared at me, and then he said, well, Colonel, you tell them, I'm quoting, that we are preventing the North Vietnamese from interfering in the democratic process in South Vietnam. I said, I'm sorry, sir, I can't say that. Well, why not, Colonel? Well, sir, if that's why we're there, I don't want to be the one that spreads the word. Ooh. It was grim for a few minutes, but I hand the man full credit. He let me talk. He listened. And he sent me down the next morning to talk to his chief security advisor in the basement of the White House. We argued for a couple of hours. But this security advisor and I argued. At one point I said something. He said, you know we can't do that. That'll bring down the Chinese. I said, the Chinese and the North Vietnamese have hated each other for a couple of thousand years. They fought wars against each other. Haven't you read their history? No, he hadn't. So finally he said, what do you think we ought to do? And I said, for God's sakes, sir, mine the harbors, because everything they used came in by ship bottom. Gas, you know, missiles, ammunition, everything, food. His response, when I said mine the harbors, was, we can't do that. That's an act of war. Now, mind you, this was about the 2nd or 3rd of October of 1967. I wonder if he ever wondered what the hell we were doing over there. Now, it was, I maintain we had every reason to be there, but we went about it improperly under the leadership of McNamara and Johnson.
Sadly, Robin Olds passed away on June 14, 2007. On some level, it is surprising to find these heroes and these airplanes together in one place a full 50 years after the last shots of World War II were fired. But here at EAA AirVenture Oshkosh, the largest annual aviation event in North America, more World War II airplanes are assembled for 1 week than at any time or place since the war ended. Warbirds of every era are featured, and the fact is, there are very few families who have not been personally touched by World War II, or Korea, or Vietnam, or Desert Storm, or Afghanistan and Iraq. So for the crowds who gather here year after year, this is so much more than an airplane show. It is very personal. It's for that reason Connie Boland, a member of the board of directors of the Warbirds of America, and her husband Ed, developed the idea for these little forums, which have grown to be major attractions for thousands.
The idea for Warbirds in Review started several years ago. On our many trips to Oshkosh, we find that people are very interested in the airplanes. When you're pre-flighting an airplane or when you're working on it, the crowd would gather. And so we said, why don't we do a formal time frame to just allow people to come visit with the pilots. But initially, it was to have the aircraft owner in front of their airplane and set a time when people could come and know that they would be able to hear about the airplane. From that, it evolved into, well, if we're going to have the P-51 here and someone talk about it, and you have the old Crow airplane, wouldn't it be wonderful if people could hear Bud Anderson's story? Wouldn't it be wonderful if people could hear from Jack Roush how he restored the airplane? So from that, that idea, it has grown and to a point that maybe it's a little too hard to handle, but the rewards are great.
The heroes of Vietnam right here, guys.
I have a military background. I served in Vietnam. In fact, my whole family is a family of warriors. My father was a Marine, I was a Marine. My grandfather was a Marine. My two sons were Marines. So it's I come from a long lineage of warriors. Well, in an Oshkosh environment, we have such a large, the terminology warbird contingent up here, which people are fascinated by both present day military, years past military, Korean, World War II, Vietnam era and stuff like that. To share people's stories, the heroes. All these people are heroes. I'm not a hero, but all of these people are heroes. The folks of World War II, it's sharing the stories and making the world aware of the sacrifice and dedication that these folks had.
In any given year, attendees might see a fully restored, flyable B-25 painted in the colors of the immortal Doolittle Raiders. And young people can learn, in many cases for the first time, the story of America's first strike on the Japanese home islands following Pearl Harbor.
Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. And that we all know the devastating blow that was to our country. The Doolittle Raid, they began working on it almost immediately afterwards, and by January they had a task force pick, a crew of B-25s, and they began training quickly, led by Jimmy Doolittle. And that's why Jimmy Doolittle, the Doolittle Raid. And what they did, obviously they practiced all their short field takeoffs and worked out all the kinks of how to fly the airplane off of a very short runway aircraft carrier. They loaded them on the Hornet and sailed for Japan. The plan was to launch around 425 miles off the coast of Japan. When you look at a map and you see Japan and you see how far away it is from everything else and how close our carrier task force was, it was extremely risky, obviously. And in fact, the task force was spotted by a Japanese trawler about 200 miles farther out. So instead of launching at 425, they launched around 615 or something like that. Obviously, that translates downstream to having fuel issues after you bomb the target. They launched at about 8 o'clock that morning of the 18th. The decision was given to launch. They took off, and it was the first strike against the home islands of Japan. And the raid physically did not do a great deal of damage. They had some effect, obviously. But one of the collateral damages is that it really changed the way the Japanese, their tactics. They had to bring some of their arsenal back home because they had no idea where these airplanes came from, and it led to some of the decisions that eventually allowed us to achieve a great victory at Midway just 2 months later in June. So from December to April 18th, they put together this attack, launched it, had the success, and then in June had the Battle of Midway. So it was really our first strike, and just a fantastic essay in courage, in everything that you can think of, every personality quality that you would want someone today to emulate. I mean, they were the real deal.
If you mention Bob Hoover's name to those who follow aviation, it's likely the first thing you'll hear is test pilot. For that he was. By the time he was 22, Hoover had already survived 17 equipment failure landings as a test pilot. He's flown more than 300 types of aircraft. He has set both transcontinental and time-to-climb speed records. He's been awarded the Lindbergh Medal, the Kitty Hawk Award, the Distinguished Flying Cross. He's a member of the National Aviation Hall of Fame, the Society of Experimental Test Pilots, and the Aerobatic Hall of Fame. General Jimmy Doolittle called Hoover the greatest stick and rudder pilot who ever lived. It's difficult to say how many of those who gathered in the shimmering heat of a Wisconsin July afternoon at Bob Hoover's Warbirds in Review Forum knew all of that. It's likely that fewer still knew about the 16 months he spent in Hitler's infamous Stalag I, after he literally put himself into combat in defiance of those who said he was too valuable a teacher to be sent to fight.
The day I was shot down, we were dive bombing some transports, feeding supplies to the Germans in southern France there. And we were attacked by 4 Focke-Wulf 190s. And we just pulled off of the target of releasing our bombs, and we were all split up. I pulled out of a break like this, and I was up about almost 90 degrees, and I saw this Focke-Wulf out here, and I just ignored him. About that time, I was hit. And believe it or not, it was a 90-degree deflection shot. Well, I knew I had no choice. The fire was so bad, I just rolled it upside down, and I hoped that they wouldn't hit me again. And I just rolled it upside down and fell out and hit the water, got tangled up in my parachute lines. But it was February, and it was, believe it or not, very cold. They talk about the Mediterranean being warm, but it's just about like the Pacific Ocean at California, at Los Angeles. It's cold in the wintertime. And I was in the water all afternoon, and a German Corvette was searching for 2 of their pilots that had gone down, and they found me. They took me off and put me in a dungeon, and I lived with the rats for the next day or so. And then they took me out for interrogation. They took me to a real fine hotel that was a billeting spot for all the German officers in that area. And the families were with them in some cases. And they tied me up on a big column in the lobby with my hands behind me like this, and the wives would come by and spit on me and slap me. And I did understand why, because so many of them had lost their families and their homes in the bombings that we were doing. And I could see that was probably pretty natural, and I endured it. But the day I got out, I got a diversion going. I got some of the fellas that I'd worked with on some of the escape attempts to start a fight. And once they started the fight, got all the guards' attention, but half of the guards had deserted by then. We could hear the big guns about 50, 70 miles away. And about the 3rd day we were out, we were getting pretty hungry. And we stopped into a farmhouse to take a chance, see if we could get some food. And fortunately, this woman spoke English. Her husband was a major in the German army, and he was based in headquarters in Germany. And she provided us with some food, and we visited a while, and I told her that I would write a note that she had been friendly to us, and for whomever got this message, treat her with kindness. And what she wanted to do was to give me a handgun and some clips of ammo. And she said when she handed it to me, you will be able to need this more than I have because of your kindness in giving me this note. And so I took the gun and thanked her, and we said goodbye. And then eventually we ran across an airfield, and it was deserted, absolutely deserted. Just a handful of people walking around and no security. And my desire was to get a Focke-Wulf 190. And so when we got to this airfield, and there were 190s in these revetments, and each one we'd go to was so badly damaged it was not flyable. Finally, I found one that was full of bullet holes, but the engine was okay, and it was full of fuel. I said, I'm going to wait till a mechanic walks by here, and I'm going to put the gun on him and bring him in here and help him get the airplane started. And so finally a German mechanic did come by, and I pointed the gun at him and yelled, and I motioned for him to come into the revetment, and he walked in there. And boy, he put his hands up, and his face was just pale as a ghost. And so I got in the cockpit, and he stood right there by me and was sitting down on the wing, and he went through everything with me, and I fired it up. And I was then concerned about getting shot at if I taxied out to the runway, so I decided I've got plenty of gas, it's full, and I just take off right out of here. It was a grass like this and pretty smooth. But it was a very uncomfortable situation because I didn't have a parachute or a cushion, and I was like this, sunk so far down in the cockpit. But I let it go, and I went straight out of that revetment, got airborne, got the gear up, and there was a 4,000-foot ceiling, and I no more than got off the ground, and I started thinking, you know, this is the dumbest thing you've ever done. Here you are in an enemy airplane, and the war's not over, and our Air Force people come in and see you. They're going to take an easy pot shot at you, and you did. Well, I stayed up just underneath the cloud deck, and I headed north till I got to the North Sea. Then I swung west, and I thought, if I've got enough fuel to get to Holland, I'll see windmills, and I'll know I'm in safe country. I had fuel gauges on empty, and I circled this one area that looked pretty smooth, and it was a road not too far away, and I had to pull the gear up and ground loop it to keep from going into a ditch. And he wiped the landing gear out, but it was sort of a hair raiser and a very dumb thing to have done. You know, the war was practically over, but all I'd thought about every day, all day long, was getting out and capturing one of their airplanes, and I was so motivated. When you first lose your freedom, and I've said this to so many young people, you don't know what we have here in this country till you can't see that red, white, and blue flag. You don't know what that stands for. That's freedom.
George McGovern is a complex man He's perhaps best remembered for the 1972 presidential campaign, when he served as the Democrat standard-bearer against an incumbent Richard Nixon and lost in what was then a record landslide. Not unlike today, the electorate in 1972 was polarized by a controversial war. McGovern advocated withdrawing from Vietnam in exchange for the return of American prisoners of war. He also favored an amnesty program for those who left the U.S. in order to avoid the draft, and proposed an across-the-board reduction in defense spending. Those positions, in combination with his belief that marijuana should be decriminalized and that the federal government ought to leave abortion law to the individual states, led to McGovernism being equated with, quote, acid, amnesty, and abortion, unquote, by journalists and politicians who opposed him. But generalizations, though convenient, sometimes obscure the truth. While McGovern will be forever considered an icon of the political left, there's much about him that seems at odds with that categorization. The fact, for example, that he was raised in rural South Dakota by two Republican parents and did not join the Democratic Party until 1952, after he had experienced war firsthand. Or that his father was a Methodist minister who inspired him to earn a divinity degree and briefly serve in the ministry himself. Or that he went on to earn a doctorate from Northwestern University and become a professor at Dakota Wesleyan University. Or that, like so many others in his generation, he eagerly answered when his country called.
The Pearl Harbor attack of December 7th, 1941 occurred when I was 19 years old. I was then a sophomore in college, and shortly after that, just a matter of a few months, I signed up with the Army Air Corps. But all 10 of us who took that CPT program, all 10 of us joined the Air Corps.
McGovern was trained to fly the B-24, and it was no small task. There were more B-24s built than any other aircraft in U.S. history. 18,000 of them were built through the combined efforts of Ford Motor Company, Douglas Aircraft, Consolidated Aircraft, and North American Aviation. The B-24 was a bare-bones brute with one mission: carry and deliver 500 and 1,000-pound bombs. The Liberators had no heat, no windshield wipers, and no hydraulics. Many historians, Stephen Ambrose among them, believed the B-24s and their crews provided the margin of victory in World War II. But the price was enormous. Over half the B-24s and their crews never returned from their missions.
I've told people it was like trying to fly a Mack truck without power steering. We used to do those hundreds of chin-ups and push-ups and all kinds of exercises all through time. I wondered, why do we have to be so damn strong? Well, I found out once I got behind the controls of that plane, there was no pressurization in that plane. You had to be on oxygen after you got to 8,000 or 10,000 feet, all the way up to 25,000, where we were usually bombing from. But the temperatures up there were around 50 degrees below zero.
McGovern flew 35 missions in harm's way. There is one mission he will never forget.
A raid against the Ploesti armament works in Czechoslovakia. I flew that mission. It was the biggest, that was the biggest ammunition manufacturing place in the world. And we got hit badly over the target. We lost 2 engines, and a third one was smoking as we turned off the target. We couldn't hold altitude. We started gradually. We threw out everything, machine guns and everything. And I finally said to the navigator, "Is there a place anywhere near here where we can make a forced landing?" And he said the only place is a little landing strip on the Isle of Viz, V-I-Z, just off the coast of Yugoslavia. The runway is only 2,200 feet long, and you need 5,000 to land a plane like that. When I got there, we weren't very high. We'd been losing air, but I looked at that runway. It looked like a postage stamp. And I knew I had to make a good landing. So we took a run at it, and we hit right on the end of that runway. I couldn't do that again if my life depended on it. I think we must have hit the first foot. And then the co-pilot and I both rode the brakes all the way down, stopped just a few feet from the end. My crew jumped out of the plane and were jumping around on the ground, kissing the ground and grabbing handfuls of dirt. I'll never forget that mission, no matter how long I live.
George McGovern received the Distinguished Flying Cross for that mission. It seems somewhat ironic that his service record was rarely mentioned during his presidential campaign.
World War II combatants seldom talk much about their record. They were proud of it, but they didn't make a big thing about it, whether they were in politics or in private life. But in retrospect, I wish I had talked more about my military record. I think that it would have strengthened my criticism of the Vietnam War if I could say, in World War II, we didn't have this, we didn't do this. We had a clear objective.
In fact, McGovern credits his experience flying B-24s with giving him the strong desire to serve his fellow man that defined his post-war career.
I'd just like to add on the service motivation that the 35 missions I flew in that big war boat there made me so grateful that I'm still alive, that I went through experiences that took the lives of people who were as good or better than I was. And yet my life was spared, and the life of my crew was spared. That also reinforced an inclination I had since childhood to be of service to other people, to be of service to the country, to be of service to my community and my family. And that's been a powerful factor in my life.
Who would think that on a Bluebird, Wisconsin afternoon in 2007, amid the flags and banners, the fun and the food of an air show, the greatest living combat ace in the history of aviation, a German, would be sitting under the wing of a T-6, protected from the sun by a Warbirds of America straw hat. His name is Gunther Rall. Technically, he is the third-ranking ace in history with 275 victories. But he is the greatest ace still alive. During the course of recording those victories, he was shot down 8 times, suffering, among other things, a broken back and the loss of his thumb. Gunther Rall became an American prisoner of war. 10 years after his last mission in an Me-109, Rall was asked to lead the new German Air Force. The new Luftwaffe procured the F-104G Starfighter from the U.S., which led Gunther to many visits to the U.S. for training and support. General Gunther Rall eventually became Germany's representative on the NATO Military Council in Brussels. Rall would be the last person on Earth to offer any kind of apologetic for serving the Third Reich as he did. In fact, he has said that the German people will pay for Hitler's racism for 1,000 years. In the foreword of Rall's biography, My Logbook, Bud Anderson, an American triple ace who first met Rall in 1975, wrote, "Germany, defeated in World War I, was a shattered nation shackled under the heavy reparations of the Versailles Peace Treaty. A boy named Gunther Rall, growing up under these conditions, had a close family relationship that instilled Christian values and discipline in his young, impressionable mind. As a member of the Boy Scouts, the spirit of adventure, a sense of belonging, and a desire to contribute to society reinforced his early upbringings. Gunther Rall's first choice was to serve his country in the infantry, but his friends soon convinced him flying was a much better path to tread." Anderson then goes on to say, "To this day, he has retained that agility, that decisiveness, that humor, and that sense of comradeship that unites fighter pilots beyond any national borders. I am happy to be able to call him friend." There will be very few remaining chances to hear, as this Warbirds in Review audience did, the first-person recollections of one man's meetings with Adolf Hitler.
First of all, I have to say that today it's very easy Nazi officer. That's nonsense. An active officer was not allowed to be neither in the Weimar Republic nor with Hitler. He was not allowed to be a member of a party with the slogan, "The officer serves his country, not a party." My first contact with Hitler, or my report to Hitler, was 1942. I had my 100th victory, and I got the oak leaves, and I had to report in his headquarters in East Prussia. We were about 5. Druschel Steinhoff was with me, and some others. After delivering the order, we were sitting around a fireplace, and Hitler developed his plans. And the main interest was certainly the war in Russia. And Hitler, in those days, he had facts. You could say, yes, I accept that, or not. But there were facts. He said, we have to flood the desert, and we have to put German farmers in the area together with the Russians to train them, and all things like that. So this was factual things. And, when the war started, we had a leading newspaper in Germany. This was the Volksbeobachter. And the main journalist had a headline, "When the first snow falls, the war is over, Russia." When the first snow fell, I was in the tent in Poltava, minus 30 degrees, and when the guards came at night, we had open fire in the tent. And this came to my mind, and I interrupted. Hitler said, "Mein Führer, how long will the war in Russia last?" The other one got a shock. "Are you crazy? Interrupt the Führer?" So why not? He said that. I got a clear answer. He said, no, things. Rall, I don't know. And this shocked me the first time. Hitler didn't know one thing. Otherwise, he always knew. He knew everything. I don't know. This was 42. We were just ahead of Stalingrad, and there was a euphoristic mentality because in 2 weeks we have done it. It was Stalingrad was a turning point of the war, and 9 months later, I had again to report to Hitler. I got the swords. It was a different Hitler. There was not facts anymore to do this. It was, no facts anymore. And this was very interesting when you saw his signature. Here, RF Hitler was this. The longer the war lasted,
it went down. Yeah, and the third time was in January 44, and the main theme, which was discussed, was certainly the expected invasion. When, where, and how can we counter? It was pessimistic, and the belief. Also, that is important. I was often asked, when were you convinced that you lose a war? Stalingrad was the first hit and turning point. And the next was the pocket battle of Kursk, when the German tank army was seriously hit by the Russians. And from there on, we never had any move to the east. I came back to my wife on a trip to another front line, and I said, Harry, the war is lost. And all these secret weapons, so nobody believed on that. But, you cannot just throw your weapon away. We were in a deadly war, no doubt. We have to see how we come out best. That was the problem.
Even in the cauldron of combat, the humor and irony of the human condition sometimes shows itself in surprising ways.
We got an alarm takeoff, and I at the Caucasus Mountains, Terek River, I went up, and I just took up an airplane which was ready to go, but they missed the watch was not in. There was in the panel a hole, and I went up 7,000 meters, as 21,000 feet, and if I say looking around, all of a sudden, somebody looked at me through that hole. It was a mouse. And I was so happy I was not alone. Somebody was escorting me, and the mouse got nervous because she didn't have an oxygen mask. I had one, don't just be. And then all of a sudden it disappeared again in the system. After landing, we never found that mouse.
Gunther Rall's last combat mission was on May 12, 1944. On that day, some 800 Allied bombers, protected by over 900 U.S. fighters, were headed for the Rhine-Main industrial area of central Germany. German ships had picked up the American radio traffic and alerted the Luftwaffe. Gunther's airplane was one of 75 German fighters to answer the challenge. Not only was he flying against long odds, he was flying against the most successful fighter group in the European theater, Colonel Hub Zemke's Wolfpack. It was in that fight Gunther's left thumb was shot off. Another Warbirds in Review participant, Robert Shorty Rankin, remembers that day for a different reason. On that day, in that battle, he became the first P-47 pilot to score 5 victories on the same mission.
We would fly close formation 45 minutes ahead of the bombers into Frankfurt, and then we'd split up like this in a fan, and I was in this westernmost flight. We were supposed to fly 15 minutes and then do a reciprocal on that heading and come back. Well, I completed a 15 minutes, turned around and come back, and I heard everywhere I listened, everybody was seeing bogeys. The Germans were all over the place. And shortly after that, I looked in front of me, and there's a gaggle of 109s, close formation, still had their tanks on. So with my flight of 4, I pressed the attack, and they saw us coming, and all of a sudden, all those tanks went off at the same time, and they don't go down like a bomb, they flutter. And I'd never seen that. That got my attention, but only for a short time, and I pressed on to make the attack. And they saw us coming, obviously, and then the whole gaggle did split S's. They went in every direction. And I picked out 2 and tied onto them, and away we go. Nothing could dive with the P-47. But we did know this, that a 109 supposedly could not pull out if it was vertical at 5,000 feet. Well, it saved my life knowing that, because I'm really concentrated, and you have tunnel vision when you're getting ready to fire. And I'm watching this, all of a sudden the wings start to flutter, and it looked pretty sad. Something was about to happen. So I looked at my speed indicator, and I was doing 575 straight down, and right away I got both hands on the stick. Felt like it was in concrete. We're approaching compressibility. So long story short, the 109 splashed. I pulled out just above the tree level and got up out of there. So that was my first victory on that day, and I got up to 8,000 feet. You're always climbing for altitude. I got to 8,000, I looked down, there's a lone 109 flying by itself, going east, made a pass down on, gave him a good burst, and it did 2 violent snap throw, boom, boom, and turned and went straight in. So that was the second one. So I pulled up from that and started to climb, and our leader, Hub's empty, Fairbanks leader, I'm 10 miles south of Koblenz, I'm over the whole Luftwaffe. That's quite a statement. I make this great big wide orbit. Then it wasn't like a mile, it was a big wide orbit. Before I could get on with somebody without somebody immediately on my tail. Finally I sound 2, they're only about 50 feet apart. I pulled onto one to the left, they didn't move, they didn't do anything to evade me. I gave them a good burst. Smoke started to come from it and the right gear fell out. So it started a slow spiral going down. I just had a little right rudder. Same thing happened to that one. His right gear fell out. And it was the 2 of them going spiraling down together. That was my 3rd and 4th of that day. So about that time I looked over and there's a 109 climbing up onto Hub Zemke's butt. And I called to him and I said, "Break," you know. He said, "Where is it?" And like a dumb lieutenant, I said, "He's climbing right up under your ass." And I thought he'd get all over me when we got back to briefing, but he didn't say one thing about that. And I managed to just get a few short bursts around the cockpit. Excuse me, I didn't think I had him, but the airplane slid off to the right and the pilot bailed out. And that was my 5th for the mission.
In another one of the historical paradoxes which have become so common during Warbirds in Review, Gunther had the chance to reminisce with Shorty Rankin 63 years after the fact about that fateful day, a day which ended so differently for each of them. Gunther bailing out of his Me-109 with a severed thumb.
And then I was tumbling. I couldn't reach the handle. But, you know, when these arms and legs are swinging around, this is a stabilizing factor for you. And all of a sudden, it was quiet. I was looking how high, and I pulled, and here I was on the parachute. And then I recognized, I said, "Shorty, where's my thumb?"
And Shorty getting a special reward.
We went back to our base, got out of the airplane, held up 5 fingers, and my crew chief was thrilled to death, and so was I. So went in and debriefed and told our story like I'm telling you here, and got a pat on the back from the group commander, and he said, "I tell you all what, I want to make sure that the ranking gets a whole chicken tonight at the officers' mess." That was my reward.
What advice do these warriors have for us today?
If there is a war, you have to serve your country. There's no doubt. And the other one on the other side, he serves his country. And we both in the front line, he and me, we suffer from the damned political failures the behind make, you know, that's it. But this is a common fate, yeah, and it binds together, and the same thinking, the same feeling, the same mentality to a certain degree.
I'll be all right. I'm a very emotional guy for a fighter pilot, I'll tell you, but I love this country, and every young person who lives here ought to be blessed to know that they've been so fortunate to be born here. And when the time comes, if you have to do your thing for your country, you better damn well step up to the bat and do it. Anybody who's so fortunate, he feels the same about his country. And I feel that way, but also you got to remember, all 3 wars and I'm still here. I'm 88. I feel fine. I'd go to tomorrow and fight, but I wouldn't fight against Gunther. We're friends.
I know.
They grew up in the Great Depression and World War I, a generation of doers and true patriots. Their average income was about $3,000 a year, and many could buy a home with a 4% mortgage. When World War II came along, the United States could not have asked for a better group to defend her, or a better plane to get the job done. The first versions of the B-17 were delivered to the U.S. military in the spring of 1937. The Flying Fortress, as it was known, would become legendary as a resilient bomber that could take a licking and keep on flying. Created to put an end to the bloodshed of trench warfare known all too well in World War I, the Boeing company built more than 12,000 of the high-flying, long-range bombers for World War II. Although he couldn't have known it in 1939, 17-year-old Hal Weakley of Carrollton, Ohio, would later become one of the brave men to fly the B-17 when his country came calling.
Most of the people that I've talked with, they're interested a little bit about my military career. As you know, I started flying the B-17 August the 4th, 1943. I went to Europe in June. I got in there in June the 12th of 44. Had 520 hours total time. And I flew a couple of missions around England just to get a feel for the whole thing. And then on June the 21st, I had my first mission, and it was to Berlin. Now, everything was backwards with me in the Air Force. I wanted to fly P-38s, so they gave me B-17s. I wanted to fly a bomber to Europe and come back on a ship. So you know what happened. I went over to the ship and flew back. I wanted to get a couple of missions into occupied territory, some short ones, and get a feel for the whole thing. So the first thing they did was they gave me the longest one, and that was to Berlin. And then, of course, I got shot down on a milk run, which I wanted in the first place. So everything was backwards, but you got to look at it in a different way. I'm still here.
At the time, it was an adventure like none other in the world, piloting the Flying Fortress, the B-17 bomber. During World War II, this menace of the skies delivered 500,000 of the 1.5 million tons of bombs which were ultimately dropped on Germany. Some estimates say 250,000 Americans served on the planes, and 80,000 were killed, wounded, or captured. B-17 pilot Hal Weakley was afraid he was about to become one of them. Having bailed out of his plane, he was in a free fall, hoping not to get shot. On the way down, after first worrying about his crew, he started thinking about his mom.
She used to send me large Hershey candy bars, and I put them in a little, what we call a musette bag, which is like a little knapsack or a backpack as they have today. And I hung it from a rafter to keep the rats from getting it. And one of my first thoughts, well, those son of a guns back there are going to get my candy.
Finally pulling his chute, Weakley made a hard landing in occupied France. After 6 weeks of hiding out, the pilot finally made it into Allied territory and met up with the British Army. Back in the United States, being debriefed at the Pentagon, the only thing Weakley could think about was getting home to his wife.
Well, I wanted to call my wife, but I couldn't call her and let her know that I was safe because of the extreme and heavy traffic they had at that time. And of course, the telephone systems were nothing like we have now. And I tried 2 or 3 times to get a connection, but it was impossible. I got in there about 4 o'clock in the morning. I got off the train, went to a payphone and called my wife, and I said, "Open the door, I'm coming home." And she had opened the door, and she was standing there, 7 months pregnant, still as beautiful as ever, and I was home.
From 1979 to 2001, he flew the Experimental Aircraft Association's restored B-17 aluminum overcast. As the last B-17 combat pilot to still be flying the plane, Weakley introduced the Fortress to a new generation and brought back floods of memories for others.
Bring it around and show it to people. Some people hadn't seen the airplane for 50 or 55 years, and some of them came out of the airplane with smiles on their face, and some old guys like me would come out of the airplane with tears running down their cheeks of the memories that they had and the friends and the people that they had lost.
John Wayne plays you in a movie, it would seem you've led an extraordinary life. In The Flying Tigers, John Wayne is said to have modeled his character after David Lee Tex Hill, one of the original American Volunteer Group, or AVG, Flying Tigers. In order to appreciate what the Flying Tigers did, you first have to understand the importance of the task they undertook. In 1937, Japan launched a full-scale invasion of China. Within 5 months, 1 million Chinese people were under Japanese control. By the end of 1937, all of the major cities in China were captured, including Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek's capital of Nanking. Claire L. Chenault, a retired U.S. Army Air Corps officer, was serving as an aviation advisor to Chiang Kai-shek during the Sino-Japanese War. The Chinese Air Force was non-existent. Generalissimo Chiang and Chenault sought and received U.S. permission to recruit Army, Navy, and Marine aviators and have them resign their commissions to join a contract volunteer force to defend China. The AVG Flying Tigers were born, and Tex Hill was one of its original recruits. China is a vast nation, and it valiantly fought on against the Japanese, even though there were 2 million Japanese soldiers in China by 1941. But in May of 1942, China nearly capitulated. Its supply lifeline was the 717-mile Burma Road, which ran from Lashio in Burma to Kunming in China. In May, the Japanese overran the American, British, and Chinese forces in Burma and completed the blockade of China. Soon, the Japanese 56th Division, the vaunted Red Dragons, were pouring up the road into China with only one remaining obstacle, the Salween River. An expansion bridge across the mile-deep river gorge had been destroyed by the retreating Chinese. But the Japanese had gone down to the river and already had a pontoon bridge under construction. That set the stage for one of the most memorable aerial combat missions in history. On May 7, 1942, Tex Hill and 3 other Flying Tigers in well-worn P-40s dived into the river gorge carrying 500-pound Russian-made bombs.
I led that mission on the 7th of May, 1942. So, if you knew your history, why, Ramo was just about in Cairo at that time. Now, the Japanese had plans to go into India. If China had collapsed, the Indians would have turned on the Brits and slaughtered them like pigs. And it's conceivable that the Japanese and the Germans would have linked up across India and Africa, and we'd have had a different situation in the world. We probably wound up with some sort of negotiated peace, because we didn't have the atomic bomb at that time. Of course, that solved everything, but that was almost 3 years later. Now, on May the 7th, when I was asked to lead a mission, the Chinese had blown the bridge, the main bridge there, but the Japanese had started building a pontoon bridge across. So I took a force of 8 planes. 4 of us were Navy guys that come out of a dive bombing squadron. We were loaded up with these big Russian bombs of 550 pounds roughly, and some frags on the wings. And I got up there and I saw that that pontoon bridge wasn't all the way across. Where that road winds down, that gorge is about a mile deep, and the road is cut back into the mountain. And so I was lucky enough to hit the road above with a bomb and knock the edge of the road off. And but I hit above it, and I had a landslide that could shovel it off, and wouldn't be any big problem. But when I knocked the edge of that road off, now they got to excavate back into that mountain, and that's rock, you know. But anyway, it blocked them, and for 3 days, they had no place to go. I mean, we slaughtered these guys. I don't know how many people we killed there, bombing and strafing them for 3 days. I don't think people have ever really understood the significance of that Salween mission. And now the people who were involved in that do, but none of the historians have really picked up on it and understand that this could have been an entirely different world, you know, if that mission had failed.
Tex Hill was a frequent visitor to Oshkosh. In 2007, just after celebrating his 92nd birthday, Tex was looking forward to hosting yet another Warbirds in Review forum. However, at the last minute, health considerations caused him to cancel. Among the dozens of sayings Tex used deftly and often was this one: if you want to have a friend, you have to be a friend. And Tex had friends. Friends like Don Lopez, Deputy Director of the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum, who flew with Tex in China. He remembered Tex's inbox was filled with peanuts and his outbox was filled with the used shells, and that he had one standing brief: "Y'all follow me." And friends like David Hartman, longtime host of ABC's Good Morning America, and Joe Engle, the commander of the second ever space shuttle flight, and Ed and Connie Bolin, founders of Warbirds in Review.
We have been at many black tie occasions with Tex, and on one occasion I happened to wear a red dress. And Tex, at no loss for words, I walk out of the room and there he is, and he said, "Oh, you make a bulldog break its chain."
And dozens of others who decided to fill Tex's forum time with a tribute to this beloved flyer, fighter, and friend. On October 11, 2007, Tex Hill, son of Presbyterian missionaries, recipient of the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Distinguished Flying Cross with 3 oak leaf clusters, the Chinese Order of the Cloud Banner, and the British Distinguished Flying Cross, passed away. They are all stories that began in a simpler time, and in the very different place that was the world of the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. The stories are countless in number and as different as snowflakes. For a little while longer, you can hear them from the mouths of those who wrote them. You can hear many of them here on an airfield in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, in a forum called Warbirds in Review.
Across the Black River, the Red River, down the mountain chains to your target. So for the pre-strike, we went up. I said, Orange 5-6, this is Lincoln lead, tally-ho. And this guy said, Lincoln, take the perch. And I said, what? He said, take the perch. Let me tell you what that told me. It told me this was a new guy from the States, probably his first mission, obviously out of SAC, following the rules. And I said, son, we don't take a perch around here. Just hold still. We'll be right there. What I didn't tell him was when we came up behind the tanker, each of us in F4s are taking turns. It was unsafe, but we're making sure that the growl of the Sidewinder coincides with the sight picture, and you're doing, the sight picture is his engines. He didn't know that. So we refueled, and everything's fine. I stayed in a bit too long. Got in a fight with a bunch of MiGs, and I'm tapping the burners. Pretty soon I looked at the fuel gauge, and we are way below what we should have been. We had 3 bingos. Bingo. Hard bingo means you better get back to and then I can't say the word, but bingo. Which meant you better get to the tanker or you're in deep trouble. So I thought, Robin, you have really climbed deep in North 6. We never usually went out low. Fortunately, no SAMs. I called, hey, Orange 5-6, head north. He says, Lincoln, I got to check with Brigham, ground. I said, Brigham is busy. Head north. I'll work the intercept, with the radar on the F4. Well, finally, here he came. And I'm looking at my fuel gauge, and it's like this. My other 3 guys were low, but I was the worst. So we got the tanker, I turned him, plugged in, relief. They finished. Now I came up for my full offload. Plugged in, he pulled the boom and stowed it. This is one of those big tanker birds. And I said, hey, give me some fuel. This pilot said, no, we're bingo, RTB, meaning he was low on his fuel, returning to base, RTB. I said, wait a minute. I'm going to have to bail out of this airplane in just a minute or two. Give me some fuel. No, we're bingo. And I said, I knew from reading his, method of operation, he could fly from where we were over northern Laos all the way to the south of Thailand, turn left, and go to the Pacific, go to the Philippines, and loiter for 20 minutes. That was his bingo. And my fuel gauge is like this. So finally I said, okay, I got 1 Sidewinder left. I'm going to drop back about 2,000 feet. And before I pull the ejection handle, I'm going to pull the trigger, so put your parachutes on. Boy, that boom came down. I plugged in. He started fueling me. My left engine quit. That's how low I was. I managed to hang on and get it started. He said, how much do you want? I said, fill it up. Which I didn't want because couldn't land with that much fuel. So I did a dirty trick, got my offload, I pulled right up in front of him about 1,000 feet and hit the jettison switch. And got rid of half of that fuel. I said, you might need it. I said, sir, the MiGs are getting awful frisky, as you know. I have an idea of something we can do about it. He just grunted. And I thought, oh, well, end of that. But 5 days later, I'm in his office. He said, okay, what's your idea? I said, sir, I want to plan a mission where I'll take my F-4s up there and we look like 105s, because the MiGs love to tangle with the 105s. So we planned and planned and planned and planned, and pulled this mission off on the 2nd of January. Now the F-4, as you may have noticed, not in afterburner, but in full mill, leaves smoke trails. One factor. Two, a friend of mine named Donovan F. Smith in 7th Air Force said, Robin, I'm going to send you QRC 190s. Like you, what the hell is that? It's an ECM pod, a jamming emitter against their SAM sites, which the 105s had carried, but we never had. So there's a bit of deception. And then Mother Nature got in the act. Morning. Morning. Mother Nature got in the act and gave us a nice undercast so they couldn't see the smoke trails. So we did all this stuff, went down right over Fujian, nothing. Turned around just north of Hanoi, came back. My backseater says, I got one. Oops, went underneath. So I turned around and came back. Then here arrived my second flight. And the first transmission was, a lead, you got a MiG-21 on your ass. What a way to start a fight. But they all popped up through the clouds. They thought we were 105s, but we were loaded for bear. And we got 7 of them. Found out I heard a transmission of their radio chatter. The lead says, whatever the ground said, hey, these aren't 105s, these are Phantoms. What do we do? Well, there was great confusion. In the meantime, we're bang, bang, bang. That was fun. Yeah.
Another leading question, your interview with President Johnson. You're coming back to the States and
Do I have
President.
to? Do I have to?
No, sir, you don't have to.
Well, I will. Okay. We're talking about Vietnam, obviously. I got home about the last day of September, 1st of October, on a Friday. My family in Washington, and I'm on leave. Phone rang Saturday. Said, get over here to the Pentagon. Chief of Staff wants to see you Monday morning. I said, I'm on leave. He said, doesn't matter, the chief wants to see you. I said, yes, sir, okay. I reported into his office. He's the one that walked up to me and said, take off that mustache. Yes, sir. The next thing I knew, he briefed me, and I'm in the Oval Office of the White House. You know, God, me? LBJ was the president. So I'm sitting on the end of a couch. He's on an easy chair, and his aide, a colonel, Air Force colonel, was sitting on my right. And Mr. President said, Welcome home, Colonel. You did well. Thank you very much, sir. Yeah, well, what's it like to be home? That was the weekend that thousands and thousands of hippies marched on the Pentagon. Sir, and my daughter Chris had told me what hippies were. I said, sir, who are all those funny-looking people that marched on the Pentagon yesterday? And I'm going to quote for you folks. He said, I got 240,000 boys over there in Vietnam. When those boys come home, they'll tell the American public what's happening. And I thought, wait a minute. That's your job, not mine. Well, of course, you don't say that. So the best thing I could think of to come up with, sir, I've been home since Friday. Been to a couple of dinner parties. No one asked me where I've been or what I've been doing for the past year. In case somebody does ask, what would you like me to tell them? I'm thinking, end of career. He glared at me and then he said, well, Colonel, you tell them, I'm quoting, that we are preventing the North Vietnamese from interfering in the democratic process in South Vietnam. I said, I'm sorry, sir, I can't say that. Well, why not, Colonel? Well, sir, if that's why we're there, I don't want to be the one that spreads the word. Ooh. It was grim for a few minutes, but I hand the man full credit. He let me talk. He listened. And he sent me down the next morning to talk to his chief security advisor in the basement of the Pentagon, of the White House. We argued for a couple of hours. How come he gets to fly it and I don't? But this security advisor and I argued. At one point I said something. He said, we can't do that. That'll bring down the Chinese. I said, the Chinese and the North Vietnamese have hated each other for a couple of thousand years. They fought wars against each other. Haven't you read their history? No, he hadn't. So finally he said, what do you think we ought to do? And I said, for God's sakes, sir, mine the harbors, because everything they use came in by ship bottom. Gas, missiles, ammunition, everything, food. His response, when I said mine the harbors, was, we can't do that. That's an act of war. Now mind you, this was about the 2nd or 3rd of October of 1967. I wonder if he ever wondered what the hell we were doing over there. Now, it was, I maintain we had every reason to be there, but we went about it improperly under the leadership of McNamara and Johnson.
This is Marius Maxwell, Dr. Marius Maxwell. This is his airplane. This is actually the first time he's seen it in this paint job. And
it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. This is
you want to tell us a little bit about this particular airplane?
Well, I really would just defer to Robin Olds. I agree with everything he says always. It's a lovely airplane, 1947 P-51, and it's Scat VI, now and henceforth, and that's about all there is to say.
We'll open it up for questions. If do you have anything else you'd like to say before we open up for questions, General?
I think I've already said too much.
No, sir, you never say too much.
Anybody got a question? Yo.
Thank you. I may have missed it in the introduction. What was your involvement in Korea? Obviously, you were in World War II, got 13 kills, Nam, 4 more or more. What were you up to in Korea? Thank you.
I had a squadron of 86s. They're drawing pilots from us. My name headed every list, turned down every time. I never knew why. I blamed a colonel that I worked for. Took me 20 years to find out. My wife then was doing a television show in New York City. I mean, she was an actress. Her mother. The backer was a very powerful, wealthy man whose friend was the Secretary of the Air Force. The backer told the Secretary, don't let him go. It took me 20 years to find that out. Yeah, I don't think you knew that, Chris.
Yes, sir.
Where? Somebody else? Of the P-38 pilot. They put aileron boost on the airplane later, but we never had it. But it would roll just as fast as you had to roll it under whatever circumstance. Matter of fact, I prided myself as being a pretty good P-38 pilot, and I could whip a P-51 down low. You know. Oh, a story about, this is kind of amusing to me. People often ask me, say, wasn't it wonderful to fly a P-38 with those two engines? And I said, boy, it sure was. I came home 5 times on single engine, all shot up. Love that bird. But you know the strangest thing? I flew another tour in P-51s. I came home single engine every day. Yeah.
General, you've had an incredible career flying a variety of different aircraft. What was your favorite aircraft that you flew over the years?
Well, I have to add the F-4, but the many years in between. I love that bird.
General Olds, just a quick question. In World War II, was your more feared adversary the 109 or the 190?
I didn't fear either one of them.
What was your preferred?
Don't get out in front of me. No, sir, I know you're asking a serious question, but you know, in combat, you don't have time for that kind of analysis. You're fighting another human being, which you don't think about, another machine. And you try to anticipate what's he going to do next, which way is he going to go. So in a big fight, there's danger from being shot at. There's danger from collisions. Okay? Those are the two worst, as you know. You try to get your people to fight as a team, but it doesn't work. You're lucky if your wingman can hold on. It takes an extraordinary wingman to follow the violent maneuvers, and pretty soon you do get split up. And in World War II, we got split up almost every fight. You go home with 1 or 2, or 1. I never saw 110 or a 410, except on the ground.
Next question.
When you're engaged, do you ever watch the controls of the other aircraft that you're engaged with? That's how dumb I am. Okay.
Answer, no. Technically, maybe too far away. But combat-wise, you're anticipating his move, depending upon your relative position. I mean, if he's behind you, you can't see. You don't want that. If he's out here in a turn, God, if he turns back that way and you're trying to turn inside him, if he goes like that, you got him. So then it's who can turn the tightest, okay? So you don't really think that way. You know what he has to do. Well, it's like one day going in, you mind if I make a story out of this?
No, sir.
I was commanding the 81st Tactical Fighting Wing in England. Been there a year and a half. Been a colonel for a long time. Phone rang. Somebody from Washington. Almost whispered, "You're on the list," meaning I was going to be a general. This was 65. I didn't want to be a general. I wanted to go to Southeast Asia. I missed Korea. I'm going to go to Southeast Asia. What can I do? I can't tell the Air Force I don't want to be a general. They'll say, okay, fine, get out. I know. I'm going to make that boss of mine so mad, he'll take me off the list. He'll want to court-martial me. Then I'll go to Southeast Asia. So I got 3 guys. We put on a formation acrobatic demonstration in F-101Cs. That's a single-seat bird. Sorry, excuse for wings. But I had done that sort of thing on the very first jet acrobatic team back in '46. I was wingman. So I kind of knew what I was doing. We put on a wonderful show. Bomb burst, the whole 9 yards. Well, my boss heard about it. I bet his missile badge burned him. So I had a call down to London, chewed out, tore up my Legion of Merit. My effectiveness report was all wrong. He waved a piece of paper in my face and said, and this says you'll never be a general. And I thought, oh, now we're getting somewhere. And he chewed and waggled his wattles at me. And finally, in the most disgusting voice, he said, and you are the kind of Air Force officer that ought to be in Southeast Asia. And I jumped up out of the chair and said, yes, sir, thank you very much, General. About face and left, and he's still shouting at me.
Got one more question over here, Robin.
Wait.
You're not done.
Told you it would be a long one. So we're going up the Gulf of Tonkin one day. I've got a backseater named Steve Croker. Turned inbound at Kep, headed for the Northeast Railroad. We got hit by about 16 MiGs. There were 8 of us. Roundy round, longest dogfight I was ever in. Got one early. Lead was doing figure 8s down. I could see him down below us. So I told everybody, get out, RTB, bingo. Made a circle to see if my guys got out. Then I left, and I thought about that guy. I said, nope, going back in. Went back in, about 25 feet. And there he is. Headed for his base, but there's a little range of hills. And I told the backseater, I said, Stevie, you watch him. He's got 3 choices. He can bail out, he can hit that ridge, or he can get over the ridge and give me some airspace and I'll get a Sidewinder. He chose the latter, Sidewinder, boom, down he went. I plugged into that tanker with 300 pounds of fuel left. Oh. Now that was a disconnected story because I forgot why I was going to tell you about that goddamn general.
Sam, this gentleman's been patiently waiting over here, Sam, to your right.
Oh, okay.
First of all, I want to thank you for the service you give to our country. And I've always wondered about the 51 versus the ME-109. Could he outturn you, or could you outturn him in a dogfight?
Good. I hope you all heard the question. I wish I could answer that question. I honestly think it depended upon the pilot in the cockpit. The birds were fairly equal. It's He worked for a friend of mine. I'm sorry, what was the question?
General, please finish the story about the goddamn general.
It was a couple of years after that encounter, and I'm now a commandant of cadets at the Air Force Academy with a baby star up here, 1. And I'm talking to my old boss, 4-star General Spike Momeyer, who was 7th Air Force Commander in Saigon. Another friend, 3 stars. Then he was then commanding a training command, George Simler. Both of those gentlemen, of course, had spent their time in Southeast Asia. So while we were talking, here came the general from London that had chewed me out, waddling across the floor. And I said, excuse me, sir. Now, I know that both of these gentlemen had read my derogatory file because it's rather thick and good reading. And excuse me, sir. Oh, General Hardy, how nice to see you again, sir. You remember that magnificent chewing out you gave me there in Ruislip back in 1965? Oh, yes, sir. These two, 4-star, 3-star, are kind of listening. I said, sir, you told me something that day that I've always wondered about. You said I was the kind of Air Force officer that ought to be in Southeast Asia. And I've wondered ever since, in your estimation, what kind of Air Force officer should not be in Southeast Asia. I thought Simler was going to fall on the floor laughing. And even Momeyer laughed, which I'd never heard before. As General Hardy whirled about, red-faced, walked away, I reached between these two gentlemen and said, "Gotcha!"
All right, folks. Thank you for coming, and please stand up and give this true American hero a hand here.
I took a hit through the hinge on this door, and the door flew back like a flap. And I would wonder, why won't the airplane go, you know? And I'm dragging this thing just like a big flap. I got as far as Brussels, landed, saw what was wrong, had to take the door off. The hydraulic jack was bent, so I took it off, found a fitting on a wrecked airplane, and put the hydraulic lines together like this. Yeah, no, I'm just a pilot, okay? Filled it up with hydraulic fluid, took off, the gear handle wouldn't move. What I had done was but 1,200 PSI against each other. So there wasn't much response when you tried to move something. I got back to base, my maintenance officer said, "What was your hydraulic pressure?" I said, he said, "Well, you do know where the gauge is, don't you?" He said, it's down there right between you on the lower panel. I said, "Oh, is that what that is?" Thank you all very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert.
We're going to start here at the nose, and I'm an FAA guy, and I'm giving you a check ride. So, tell me about the airplane.
Well, when you're looking here, you're looking for normal strut extension, which a lot of times at first it's going to be a little higher than normal, but you're looking for about a fist. Once you get in and start up, it'll get down to that. You're looking for any normal, unusual wear and tear on the tire. On your arms here, you're looking for any cracks, making sure there's no wear on that or hairline cracks. You're looking in your wheel well. There's a lot of hydraulic and lines in there. You're looking for leaks. You're looking for making sure all your nuts are in, cotter pins are in. There's a lot of linkage and stuff. You want to make sure everything is where it's supposed to be. Just making sure the nose wheel's secure and the gear door is good and tight, and making sure all of your nuts and your cotter pins and everything are secure to the door.
Tell us a little bit about the Army.
Yeah, you had 4 50 caliber machine guns and a 20 millimeter cannon. So these things packed quite a bit of power out of the nose. And, you know, these things held the ammo right in between there, right behind on this panel here, and they could pack a punch. So they had a lot of ammo.
Going on down.
Yep. Going on through here. Of course, you drain your fuel sumps. There's fuel sumps you drain. Make sure you don't have any water or particles in your fuel. So you take and drain your fuel sumps, and again, check your door. And over here, as we start on the right nacelle, you're looking again your strut extension, making sure there's no cracks in your gear at all, making sure all your connections are good and sound, making sure your gear door fairings are tight, looking for the nuts and the cotter pins. You're checking your coolant doors, making sure they're attached, your linkages are good, and that there's nothing missing. The oil coolant doors are electrical, your coolant are hydraulic. So you just want to make sure everything's connected and working good.
What
there.
is the power plant?
It's a V1710 Allison, 1200 horse. And of course, it's got 2 engines. Wartime takeoff power was 1475. And they hold 13 gallons of oil and lots of fuel.
Okay. Obviously, liquid cooled, and that's your scoop back there.
Yep, that's your coolant radiators.
How many tanks do you have? Fuel tanks?
You have 3 fuel tanks in each wing, not counting your drops. Your inboards, your mains, 93. Then you have 60 in reserve and 55 in the outer wing. Yep.
With your drop tanks, you got plenty of fuel.
The drop tanks, you have well over 1,000 gallons.
Okay, now the props are kind of unique here.
Yeah, your props are unique. They're Curtis Electric props, and obviously when you're doing a walk around, you're checking for any dings or anything unusual with the prop. But they're Curtis Electric props, so they're not like your hydromatic propellers. And in the airplane, you have right when you start up, part of your checklist is to make sure all the circuit breakers are in, because like a P-40, it's got the electric prop, and they're somewhat prone to failure. So you really got to make sure you're watching the electric prop.
So the electric prop wasn't as reliable as a hydraulic prop?
That's what I've heard. I've never personally had a failure, but we've had a failure on this airplane, and we have on a P-40. And then you have a fixed pitch lever where you decrease and decrease manually with a toggle switch, and it's sensitive, but it works good to get you home. And then your glycol tank is right there, and your oil cooler. And you're checking the leading edge for any, I guess, deformities or anything that you may have hit. Your nav lights, carburetor air.
Okay.
And then these have the Fowler type flaps. So once you're in the airplane, you really can't see them. There's really not much you can do other than just kind of look and make sure there's, everything looks okay. And your ailerons, check those out. Your flight controls, make sure there's nothing unusual about those. Coming back, making sure there's nothing inside the air scoop. Garbage or whatever. And then coming back here to your rudders, 2 rudders, and just making sure movement's free, your trim tab. And then you have your elevator back here with your trim tab, and making sure your controls are free, just kind of looking to make sure nothing looks abnormal. Big elevator.
Story behind the ballast on here?
Well, from what I understand, they were put on to prevent compressibility when they went into their dives. A lot of the guys couldn't pull out, but it turns out, from what I was told, that those were not the answer. They kept putting them on because they were in production, but it's the fillet outside of the cockpit that actually prevented the compressibility. But they kept putting these on because they're in production.
I'd understood that the Army
breaks up the airflow.
The Army required it, even though it was not required. They put it on. Kelly Johnson said that the fillet did the job, but
Yep.
they required it anyway.
That's correct. They kept putting it on, but they figured the fillet by the cockpit was the ticket. And then, of course, you continue your walk around. You go over to the left nacelle and do the same checks. And then you would go up on top and do your cockpit check, and you're ready to get in there and do your pre-flight for the cockpit.
Okay, Kevin, let's talk about the nose art for a little bit.
Yes.
Why did Robin name this airplane Scat anyway?
He named his airplane Scat because one of his best friends was not able to get into the military, and that was his way, from what I understand, reading his book, of getting his friend involved since he couldn't get in the military because he had medical conditions.
And so this Scat name, it was used all the way through Vietnam. Is that correct?
All the way through Vietnam. It was on his Phantom, and it was on his P-38, his Mustang. And the neat thing about Scat III is he became an ace in this airplane, shot his 5th airplane down in this. So the P-38 has significance in respect to that. And he had a lot of amazing stories in the P-38. Like I said, I believe it was 2 airplanes. He shot down 2 airplanes with no engines running because when they dropped their drop tanks, he didn't switch his tanks and ran out, but he still shot them down. So pretty neat story.
Which is in his diary.
Which is in his, yeah, that's right. That's right.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.